Kimberly Moore noticed the police officers the moment she stepped into the department store, but she kept walking anyway. She had learned long ago that hesitation drew attention. Confidence, even when borrowed, was armor. The chandeliers above cast warm light across marble floors, the soft music and muted conversations creating the illusion of safety. Rain streaked the glass doors behind her, the city blurring into gray. It should have been a simple errand. A gift. In and out. She was halfway down the aisle when she felt it, the subtle shift in the room. The wrong kind of silence. Footsteps stopping behind her. "Ma'am." The word landed like a hand on her spine. Kimberly turned slowly. Two officers. Hands resting too close to their belts. Eyes already narrowed, already decided. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. 6 years of careful living had taught her how quickly a moment could turn. They asked for her bag. No explanation. No warrant. Around them, shoppers slowed. A woman lifted her phone. Someone whispered. Kimberly felt the familiar tightening in her chest, but she didn't let it show. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Panic had never saved her before. She handed over the bag. As one officer began searching through it, Kimberly's mind flickered, not to the store, not to the crowd, but to the promise she'd made when she signed her name on a document she never wanted. Temporary, she'd been told. Just until the danger passed. The officer's hand reached the bottom of the bag. He pulled out her identification. And everything stopped. The officer stared. His partner leaned in, read the name, and went still. The air shifted, sharp, unmistakable. Authority drained from their posture as if someone had pulled a switch. The store manager stepped forward, suddenly nervous. No one spoke. Because printed beneath Kimberly Moore's photo was a last name that didn't belong in a place like this. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story pulls you in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because I have another beautiful story coming tomorrow, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into the story. The door swung shut behind the officers, their footsteps fading into the distance, leaving an unnerving silence in their wake. Kimberly stood at the edge of the aisle, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. The officers had come in strong, their presence a thunderstorm of authority that had quickly dissipated under her quiet defiance. Now, the store felt different, charged with a tension that was palpable, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Whispers began to ripple through the aisles. The murmurs of customers and employees alike creating a low hum of speculation. The officers had stepped back, their initial confidence faltering as they reassessed their approach, clearly thrown off by the silence that had enveloped Kimberly. She hadn't said much, only enough to assert that she wasn't the one they should be questioning. The store manager, a balding man with a nervous twitch, finally found his voice. "I'm sorry about the disturbance," he stammered, glancing between Kimberly and the officers, his eyes darting as if searching for a way to diffuse the situation. "This was all just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," one of the officers echoed, his brow furrowing slightly. The air was thick with unspoken questions, the tension crackling like static. "Right," he added, his tone softening, clearly recalibrating his approach in the aftermath of Kimberly's steadfast silence. "We'll leave you to it then." As the officers turned to exit, the store seemed to exhale, a collective breath released as apologies replaced accusations. The aftermath hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the power dynamics at play. Kimberly remained rooted in her spot, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or defend herself. Her silence had spoken volumes, a quiet authority that unnerved even those who wore badges. Once the police had left, the tension in the store shifted, a fragile peace settling over the aisles. But it was a peace that felt temporary, just a thin veneer over the undercurrents of unease. Customers resumed their shopping, but their glances often flickered toward Kimberly, their curiosity palpable. What had just happened? Who was she? With a deep breath, Kimberly exited the store, the cool air hitting her face as she stepped into the rain. The raindrops fell in a steady rhythm, drenching the pavement and blurring her vision. She welcomed the rain, letting it wash away the remnants of the confrontation, but as she walked, her mind began to drift back to a memory, a flash that sent a chill down her spine. It was the first time she had heard Brian Lewis's name used in a hushed, fearful tone. "You don't want to cross him," someone had warned, their voice trembling with the weight of the unspoken. At the time, the phrase had seemed like a distant caution, one she hadn't fully grasped. But now it felt like a ghost lingering in the back of her mind, a specter of the danger that was always close at hand. As she walked, her phone vibrated in her pocket, pulling her from the depths of her recollection. She fished it out, her heart racing as she saw the message flash across the screen. "I told you not to be visible." The words landed heavily, a punch to the gut that sent a wave of unease washing over her. Who had sent it? What did they know? The chill settled back in her bones, a reminder that she was not as alone as she had thought, that Brian's reach extended far beyond her immediate surroundings. He was a name that commanded respect and fear, a presence that lingered just out of sight. The rain intensified, drenching her clothes and amplifying the sense of vulnerability that clung to her. Each step felt heavier, her surroundings morphing into something more oppressive. The familiarity of the streets twisted into a labyrinth of uncertainty, where shadows seemed to loom larger and whispers of caution echoed in her mind. As she moved through the downpour, the city transformed around her, its once comforting corners now tinged with an ominous edge. She could feel Brian's shadow trailing her, a reminder that the name that ended conversations was also the name that could dictate her fate. The unease settled deep within her, and for a moment, Kimberly stood still in the rain, the world around her blurring into a watercolor of grays and blues. She realized that she had entered a game she didn't fully understand, one where the stakes were higher than she had anticipated. And as she turned to continue her journey, a chilling thought crossed her mind. Brian knew already, lurking in the shadows, always a step ahead, waiting for the moment to reveal his influence. The rain was relentless, drumming against the pavement like an urgent heartbeat as Kimberly navigated through the puddles, her thoughts tumbling back in time. Each drop felt like a reminder of choices made, paths taken that had led her to this moment. She could see flashes of her past as vividly as if she were reliving them, moments that had shaped her, molded her into the person she had become. Flashback. Before the marriage, Kimberly had been a woman with dreams, aspirations tethered to an ordinary life. She had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in a web of deceit that spun too quickly for her to escape. Information had been manipulated, twisted into a narrative that had placed her squarely in the sights of those who sought to eliminate her. Her enemy was not just a faceless figure lurking in the shadows, it was a calculated force that moved with lethal precision. The assassination attempt had been brutal, a sudden explosion of chaos that had shattered her world. She could remember the adrenaline surging through her veins, the taste of fear sharp on her tongue as she dove for cover. It was a moment that forced her into hiding, a self-imposed exile where she learned the value of silence and the necessity of survival. It was during this dark chapter of her life that she first met Brian Lewis. The encounter was etched into her memory, not for any romantic notions, but for the cold efficiency of it. He had walked into the dimly lit room where she was staying, his presence commanding and unyielding. There was nothing tender about him. He was all business, a man who exuded power wrapped in a veneer of calm. The air had crackled with tension, but it was devoid of any warmth. "You need protection," he had said, his voice steady. "I can provide it." The deal. The offer he presented was stark, stripped of any romantic pretense. Marriage for protection, an arrangement that came with a hefty price. There would be no intimacy, no public life, and certainly no love. It was a temporary solution, a means to an end, and yet it was the only option she had. death lingered as an ever-present alternative, lurking just beyond the veil of her decision. "Accept this, and you'll live," he had assured her, his gaze unwavering. In that moment, Kimberly had felt a flicker of resolve igniting within her. She was not just a victim. She was a player in her own narrative, and choosing to marry Brian was a strategic move in a game she had not chosen, but had to navigate nonetheless. Return to present. With the memory still fresh in her mind, Kimberly stepped into the present, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like the storm clouds above. The rain continued to pour, but beneath its relentless rhythm, she felt a sense of clarity. She had made her decisions, albeit under duress, and had emerged not as a passive participant, but as a woman reclaiming her agency. As she turned a corner, a sleek black car rolled up beside her, its engine humming softly like a predator stalking its prey. She recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Brian. The window slid down, revealing his sharp profile, the lines of his face chiseled and uncompromising. "Get in," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a split second, fear clawed at her insides, a visceral reminder of the danger that shadowed her every move. But alongside that fear was an undeniable resolve. This was her life, her choice, and while it was forged in the crucible of necessity, it was still hers to control. With a deep breath, she opened the door and climbed into the car, the scent of leather and something distinctly Brian enveloping her. As the door clicked shut behind her, she felt a familiar tension settle in the air between them, a reminder that in Brian's world, nothing stayed temporary. The stakes were high, and she knew that what had begun as a marriage of convenience could quickly spiral into something far more complex. As the car pulled away from the curb, she cast one last glance at the rain-soaked street, the fleeting sense of freedom washing away with every passing moment. In Brian's world, safety came at a cost, and she was prepared to navigate the murky waters ahead. Fear and resolve danced within her, but Kimberly was no longer simply surviving. She was ready to confront whatever lay ahead, knowing that she was far more than a pawn in someone else's game. The engine hummed softly as Brian drove through the winding roads, the trees casting long shadows over the asphalt. Kimberly sat beside him, tension crackling in the confined space of the car. The air was thick with unspoken words, a chasm of misunderstanding yawning between them. She turned her gaze to the window, watching the scenery blur past, her heart racing with a mix of anger and betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kimberly finally broke the silence, her voice a low, simmering accusation. "You've been acting like everything is fine, but it's not. What are you hiding from me?" Brian's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the leather creaking under the pressure. "I didn't want to involve you in this," he replied, his tone measured. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me? Or using me?" Kimberly shot back, her defiance bubbling to the surface. "You've kept me in the dark, Brian. You think you can just decide what's best for me." His silence was deafening, and she felt a flicker of satisfaction in her anger. But as the weight of his unspoken truths hung in the air, her satisfaction morphed into a deeper frustration. "Why won't you just tell me the truth?" Brian finally glanced over, the tension in his jawline evident. "The threat never ended, Kimberly. Today was a test. I needed to see if you could handle it, if you could trust me." Her heart raced, a mixture of dread and disbelief washing over her. "A test? You put me in danger to test me?" "Not just danger," he admitted, his voice lowering. "The marriage protected you. But it also marked you." She blinked, processing his words. The gravity of his confession settled heavily in her stomach. It was more than just a bond. It was a brand, a label that came with a cost she hadn't fully understood until now. As they pulled into the driveway of Brian's estate, the grand structure loomed ahead, illuminated by soft lights that cast long shadows against the surrounding trees. Kimberly felt a chill creep up her spine as they parked. This place had always felt like a sanctuary, a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. But now it felt more like a fortress, its walls closing in around her. When Brian turned off the engine, the silence felt oppressive. "You're not a guest here, Kimberly," he said, his voice steady yet filled with an underlying urgency. "You're an asset. That's how they see you. That's how I see you." The words struck her like a blow, and she recoiled slightly, her mind racing. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about survival. "I won't be a pawn in your game," she replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her bravado. Brian regarded her with a mixture of frustration and concern. "I'm not playing games. I'm trying to keep you safe. You need to stay the night." "Stay?" The idea felt suffocating. "I won't just sit here and be a target for whoever is after you." He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. "If you leave now, you're putting yourself in danger. You need to understand what's at stake." Kimberly hesitated, her defiance wavering as the danger of the situation seeped into her consciousness. "You don't get to dictate my choices, Brian." "I'm not dictating," he insisted, his voice softening. "I'm warning you. If they think you're temporary, they'll try again." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air between them, shifting the dynamic in an instant. She could see the truth in his eyes, the fierce protectiveness that lay beneath his stoic exterior. It was unsettling and strangely comforting at the same time. "I don't like this," she finally admitted, her anger giving way to a deeper realization. "I don't like being used or treated like a pawn. But I also don't want to be in danger." Brian's expression softened, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Then trust me. Just for tonight." There was a moment of silence, the tension shifting as she weighed her options. Could she trust him? Could she let her guard down long enough to accept his protection? As the realization of their situation settled in, Kimberly felt the walls she had built around her begin to crack. She wasn't just angry, she was scared. And in that fear, perhaps there was a glimmer of trust beginning to form. "Fine," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But this doesn't change anything. I'm still not your pawn." Brian nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his features. "We'll figure it out together. Just remember, you're not alone in this." The night stretched before them, fraught with uncertainty and uncharted territory. As they stepped out of the car, Kimberly felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a heavy cloak. The stakes were high, and the terms of their new reality were only beginning to take shape. The grandeur of Brian's estate was overwhelming as Kimberly crossed the threshold into his world. It was a realm defined by opulence and power, a stark contrast to the life she had left behind. Every corner of the mansion whispered of wealth, but beneath the polished surfaces lay a current of danger that pulsed just beneath her skin. She felt exposed, a lone figure stepping into a spotlight that had remained dark for too long. As she settled in, the security protocols were the first to draw her attention. Brian had arranged for a team of guards, their presence a constant reminder that danger loomed nearby. Each day began with a briefing that outlined the potential threats they faced, and Kimberly found herself absorbing the information like a sponge, her instincts sharpening in response to the volatile environment. The staff, initially curious, soon adopted a wary demeanor. They eyed her with a mix of skepticism and intrigue, their whispers echoing in the hallways. Kimberly could feel their judgment, their unspoken questions hanging in the air. Who was she, and why had she been brought into this world? She refused to be a mere curiosity, a fleeting distraction in their lives. Instead, she focused on understanding the dynamics at play, observing how power shifted among the household members, from Brian to his assistants, and even to the guards. Media whispers began to trickle in, reports surfacing about Brian's sudden change in lifestyle. Rumors of his marriage circulated, each article laden with speculation about the new woman in his life. Kimberly could feel the spotlight intensifying, and with it came a sense of urgency. This was not just a game, it was a stage where every action was scrutinized, and she needed to navigate it carefully. As the days passed, Kimberly learned how power actually worked in this new world. It was not merely about wealth, it was about influence, perception, and control. She began challenging Brian strategically, asking probing questions that forced him to reconsider his approach. "You can't shield me from everything," she insisted one evening as they reviewed the latest security updates. "I need to know how to protect myself too." Brian regarded her with a newfound respect, his expression shifting from protective to appreciative. "You're right. This isn't just about keeping you safe, it's about empowering you." Their conversations began to shift, becoming more tactical and layered. They shared silences that spoke volumes, moments where their gazes met and the weight of unspoken understanding hung between them. Kimberly felt a subtle emotional intimacy growing, a connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. One night, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the sprawling estate, the stars twinkling overhead, Kimberly turned to Brian. "It's not just about the threats outside. There's a power struggle happening within these walls too," she observed, her voice steady. Brian nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You're adapting faster than I expected. It's refreshing to have someone who challenges me." Her confidence blossomed in that moment, fueled by his acknowledgement. Yet it was tempered by a nagging suspicion that lingered in the back of her mind. How much of this was genuine? How much was a calculated move on his part? The following day, an intelligence report arrived with alarming news. Their enemies were indeed watching. The vague threats she had sensed were now confirmed, and the reality of her situation solidified into something tangible and urgent. The stakes were escalating, and she was no longer just a bystander in this dangerous game. That evening, as they gathered in Brian's study, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Brian turned to her, his expression serious. "We need to take the next step," he said, his voice low. "You can't remain in the shadows anymore. They need to see you, to understand that you're not just a pawn in this." Kimberly felt a surge of apprehension at his words. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her heart racing. Brian stepped closer, the gravity of his gaze holding her captive. "It's time we stop pretending." His statement hung in the air, heavy with implications. She could feel the walls closing in, the weight of expectation settling over her. This was a turning point, one that would thrust her further into the public eye, into a role she wasn't sure she was ready for. As she met his gaze, a mix of fear and determination surged within her. She was no longer willing to be hidden. She would emerge, not as a shadow, but as a force to be reckoned with. Yet, the question remained, would stepping into the light expose her vulnerabilities or reveal her true strength? The morning light filtered through the grand windows of Brian's study, casting warm shadows across the polished wooden desk. Kimberly sat across from him, her heart pounding as she prepared to discuss the future, her future. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the weight of their choices pressing down like a heavy fog. "Permanent visibility means permanent protection," Brian stated, his voice steady but laced with urgency. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "If we're visible together, they'll know you're not just a temporary asset. They'll think twice before making any moves against you." Kimberly listened intently, her mind racing. The idea of being in the public eye was terrifying. It meant losing the semblance of privacy she had clung to, but it also meant safety. She felt torn between the desire for autonomy and the instinct for survival that had grown stronger since stepping into this world. "Do you really think being visible will keep me safe?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "What if it makes me a target?" Brian's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. "I know it's a risk. But think about it. If they see you as a permanent part of my life, they'll think twice about moving against us. They'll have to reassess their strategies." Her heart sank as she confronted a deeper fear, the fear of being owned. Would marrying Brian mean surrendering her autonomy? Would she become just another piece on his chessboard, manipulated at will? The thought sent a chill down her spine. "Brian," she started, her voice trembling, "I don't want to be a pawn in this game. I want to be my own person." To her surprise, he leaned back slightly, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not asking you to be a pawn, Kimberly. I'm offering you a partnership. I want you by my side, not beneath me." His words hung in the air, unexpected and profound. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man behind the power, someone who valued her mind, her spirit, and her choices. "You really mean that?" she asked, searching his eyes for sincerity. "Absolutely," he replied, his tone earnest. "This is about us, not just me. We can face this together." The prospect of partnership ignited something within her, a flicker of hope mixed with apprehension. She had been resisting the idea of a public marriage, fearing it would strip her of her identity. But the reality of their situation demanded a choice. Would she step into the light beside Brian or remain hidden, always looking over her shoulder? As if sensing her internal struggle, Brian continued, "This is more than just a marriage. It's a statement. If we go public, we're declaring our unity, our strength. It's about showing them that they can't break us." With every word, Kimberly felt the veil of uncertainty begin to lift. She considered the ripple effects of their decision. The photos, the public appearances, they would create a narrative that couldn't be easily challenged. If they projected confidence and unity, perhaps the threats that loomed over them would dissipate. "Okay," she finally said, her voice steadier now. "Let's do it. Let's go public." A wave of relief washed over Brian, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You won't regret this, I promise." As the days unfolded, they prepared for the announcement. The media frenzy that followed was intense, with cameras flashing and reporters clamoring for details. Kimberly stood beside Brian at the press conference, her heart racing as she faced the sea of faces. This was her moment of truth, her choice made manifest. Photos flooded social media, capturing their smiles, their closeness, the undeniable chemistry that sparked between them. The immediate ripple effects were palpable. The whispers of threats began to fade into silence as their visibility increased. Power, Kimberly realized, bends when certainty exists. The enemies who had once lurked in the shadows were forced to retreat, hesitant to challenge an alliance that appeared so strong. In the weeks that followed, Kimberly settled into her new role with a growing sense of confidence. She was no longer just Brian's wife, she was an integral part of his world. Together, they navigated the complexities of their public life, forging a path that was uniquely theirs. Yet, as she stood beside Brian during a gala event, dressed in a stunning gown that made her feel both powerful and vulnerable, a twinge of doubt crept in. Had she truly made the right choice? Was their partnership as solid as it seemed, or was she still entangled in a web woven by someone else? As if sensing her hesitation, Brian leaned closer, whispering, "We're in this together, remember? No matter what happens." He looked at her with such intensity that it sent shivers down her spine. And in that moment, with her heart racing and the world watching, Kimberly took a deep breath and accepted the reality of her choice. She was visible now, standing beside Brian, not hidden anymore. She would face whatever came next, not as a pawn, but as a partner. Months had passed since the tumultuous events that had shaken Kimberly's life to its core. The world outside her window buzzed with the same relentless energy, yet within the fortified walls of the empire she now operated, a different rhythm pulsed. Kimberly had become a pivotal player in a game she once feared would consume her. Now, she was the architect of change, reshaping systems with a quiet determination that spoke volumes about her transformation. Kimberly moved through the sleek, glass-walled offices with an air of authority that felt entirely new. She was no longer the woman who had once been cornered in that small store, vulnerable and afraid. The soft hum of conversations, the click of keyboards, and the rustle of papers were now sounds of her domain, one she controlled with the precision of a maestro. Each decision she made reverberated through the ranks, solidifying her position and fortifying her resolve. Brian, her once reluctant ally, had grown to trust her judgment completely. He watched as she navigated the complexities of the Empire's inner workings, admiring her ability to dismantle outdated practices and replace them with innovative strategies. "You have a gift, Kimberly," he often said, his voice tinged with awe. "You see things others don't. You're not just surviving, you're thriving." While her exterior remained composed, Kimberly felt a storm of emotions swirling within her. She had embraced her power, wielding it like a shield against the shadows of her past. She learned to trust herself, to lean into her instincts, and to make choices that had once seemed unimaginable. The people who had hunted her, who had thrived on her fear, were now mere whispers in the wind, their influence extinguished. The final confirmation of their demise had come not through grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but through quiet assurance. The Empire was hers to command. Reflecting on her journey, Kimberly often found herself returning to the day in the store. That moment of vulnerability had been a crucible, one that had forged her into the woman she was today. She remembered the panic that had coursed through her veins, the way she had felt like a trapped animal with nowhere to escape. But that fear had ignited a spark within her, a determination to rise, to take control, to choose her path rather than let it be dictated by others. As she stood in her office, gazing out at the city that sprawled beneath her, Kimberly felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had not just escaped, she had conquered. The power she now wielded was not a mere facade, it was a testament to her resilience and a reminder of her choices. She had survived because she had chosen power, not as a means to an end, but as a lifestyle, a philosophy that would guide her for years to come. The empire she had helped shape was not merely a business, it was a sanctuary, a place where others could find their footing amidst chaos. Kimberly envisioned a future where power was redefined, where authority was less about domination and more about empowerment. Each initiative she launched, each policy she instituted, was a brick laid in the foundation of a new order, an order that valued strength not just in numbers, but in unity. As she prepared for another meeting, Kimberly felt the weight of her journey settle comfortably around her shoulders. She had transcended her past, evolving from a target into a force of nature. The shadows that had once threatened to engulf her were now behind her, and she stood confidently in the light of her own making. In the quiet moments, when the hustle of the empire faded into the background, Kimberly often pondered the deeper implications of her transformation. She had learned that true empowerment came not from external validation, but from a steadfast belief in oneself. She had taken the reins of her life, crafting a narrative that was uniquely hers. As she smiled at the thought, an undeniable truth anchored itself in her mind. She had never been saved by a hero or a grand gesture. Instead, she had chosen who could stand beside her, who could share in her journey of self-discovery and authority. She was never saved. She chose who could stand beside her. In that moment, Kimberly understood that her journey was far from over. It was merely the beginning of an era defined by her own rules, a testament to the power of choice and the strength that came from within. The empire was hers, and she was ready to reshape it, one bold decision at a time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you loved this one, I have more videos just like it waiting for you on my channel. Click the video on your screen now and keep the story going. Enjoy!